Greetings loyal subscribers and honoured guests. It has been on hiatus for quite some time, much longer than I had originally intended in fact, but at long last Covertape Zzapped returns with a second season of 13 episodes. Once a fortnight I will be delving deep into the archives and playing through the contents of each megatape that came attached to an issue of Zzap in the early 90s. We're up to issue 69 today, steady on there, this time, and we have two incredibly violent licensed games gracing the front cover. I remember playing Robocop 2 quite a bit back in the day, first in demo form, then later the full game as a friend of mine decided to pick up the cartridge version. I had more fun with it than the original Robocop on the C64 to tell you the truth, as it was easier, much more of a platform game than the arcade style of the first one, and there could be some frustrating jumps from time to time, but worth checking out if you missed it. I'll be talking about the other game, Narc, in more detail in just a second, as it's the first demo that we've got coming up on this tape. In fact, why don't we just stop faffing around here and check it out? The arcade version of Narc doesn't really hold any nostalgia for me at all. I don't think I ever played the real cabinet when it was current, and to be honest, the over-top macho action movie style of it never really appealed to me all that much. If you've played other games made by Eugene Jarvis and his colleagues, such as Smash TV or Total Carnage, then you will have an idea of what to expect here. Lots of violence, lots of gore, limbs flying everywhere, movie references aplenty, and absurd end-of-level bosses. While I definitely enjoyed Smash TV a lot, the gameplay of Narc gets tired rather quickly for me. This C64 demo is rather brief, with it cutting out partway through the subway section of level 1. That only gives you a couple of minutes of playtime, but you can always go again. There's not enough meat to this demo to have really got me interested enough in picking up the full game. Technically though, the C64 version is impressive, handling a lot of sprites at the same time and managing to keep the two-player simultaneous mode from the arcade version fully intact. The presentation is a little flat though, having lost the flying limbs and gore of the original. All in all, I can't say I'm a fan really. What did the Zzap reviewers make of it though? They were actually both pretty positive. Robin was rather concerned about the load times, especially for those who still only had tape players, but he did remark that the blocky C64 characters are so well animated they look digitised. And he was extremely impressed with the scanning sections on the bread bin, saying they captured the style of the arcade perfectly. Phil thought that the spot effects for many of the sounds on the C64 version sounded really impressive, such as the helicopter whirs and rocket blasts, but ultimately he did agree with me, saying, "Gameplay is unsophisticated and 12 levels of the same game can get repetitive." Nevertheless, they ended up giving the game an impressive score of 84% overall, which was 2% higher than the Amiga version, and they summed things up with technically impressive and extremely playable. The other item on side A is another full release from those folks at Hewson Racket. This time it's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up by the name of Subterranea, and as you may imagine the levels all take place in underground caves. This is your fairly standard horizontal blaster, with waves of aliens to shoot down, backgrounds to weave your way through, and doors to navigate by quickly shooting the button that opens them and then zipping through. I quite enjoyed playing this game. The difficulty level seems to be pitched fairly well, so that you can get past level 1 fairly easily on your first few goes, but it does get trickier after that. I don't think this truly stacks up against the heavyweights of the genre on the C64, like Armalite, the modern release Soul Force, or my own personal favourite shooter on the C64, Dragon Breed. It's a decent effort though, and it scrolls nicely with no technical issues such as slowdown or flicker. I think it would have been worth the £3 it cost to pick up on the budget label, so it's definitely a worthwhile inclusion on this tape. The two reviewers both thought that Subterranea was lacking the polish of the best shooters on the system, but they could forgive it due to the budget nature of the software. They agreed that 16 levels was a substantial amount of game for the cost, but Paul lamented the lack of any kind of power-up system. I do agree with him there. Gordon finished up his section by saying, "It's derivative of Synapse and poorly fronted, but Subterranea is still worth a look." Paul finished up his thoughts by saying, "The rough edges wouldn't stop me recommending this." They ended up giving the game a decent score of 74%, and concluded with, "A fine example of the genre at an easily affordable price." Time to flip the tape over to side B now, and we begin with a text adventure called Vaughans Layer. By now you're probably tired of hearing me say that I'm not a fan of this genre, but it's still true and I still struggled to enjoy this game. I was mildly impressed with how this one in particular implements some elements of a role-playing game though, such as letting you choose from 3 different classes at the start, a warrior, a wizard or a priest, and incorporating combat with enemies such as spiders and ogres. I couldn't really figure out the combat system though. I guess you just automatically fight a hostile monster that's in the same room with you, without the need of having to enter commands like swing sword, etc. Ultimately though, the same frustrations that I always encounter with games of this ilk also apply here. I can't find any evidence online that Zzapped ever reviewed this game, so I can't tell you what they thought about it, I'm afraid. So let's move on to our final game this episode. We're capping things off with a playable demo of an action-adventure called Wrath of the Demon by Readysoft. I recognised the name of this developer, and it turns out they worked on a lot of the home ports of Laserdisc games, such as Vaughans Layer and Space Ace. Not the C64 versions of those games though. Anyway, Wrath of the Demon was an original concept by them, and it's quite an ambitious game, taking up tons of space across multiple floppy disks. In this demo section, our hero is on horseback making his way somewhere or other, probably trying to save a damsel, I would guess. Anyway, he's going like the clappers, and he's being assaulted by technicoloured bats while he's doing so, which you need to take out with a well-timed punch. You also need to leap across hazards strewn in your path, or push downwards to grab potions on the ground. If you take too many hits, then you will lose. If you make it to the end of the level, then the demo just loops around again. It all looks rather lovely though, with multiple layers of parallax scrolling, and it controls pretty well too. I think this demo leaves quite a strong first impression, and I would have definitely been intrigued enough to track down the full release and see what the other stages were like. Reading through Zzapped's full review 6 issues later, we find that the game opens with this same horse riding section, before moving on to single screen fighting stages against a variety of beastly opponents, interspersed with a couple of horizontally scrolling sections where you need to find the right doors to proceed, which might require you making a map so you can remember the path later. Phil King found the gameplay a little bit inconsistent, with the first stage making a great first impression, while the fighting stages grow a bit stale eventually, and then a sudden spike in difficulty during the scrolling sections. He did say that Wrath is a great game to show off to any would-be C64 graphics bashers. He ended up giving the game a respectable but not amazing score of 76%, summing up with, "Looks great, but lacks long-term challenge." So there you have it, our first episode of Season 2 is in the bag. My pick of these games has to be Subterranea personally. I do enjoy a good horizontal shooter, and while it's nothing spectacular, it is solidly made overall. I also want to track down a copy of Wrath of the Demon and check out some of the other levels now, if only to see the impressive graphics. Anyway though, it's time for me to say goodbye for now. See you for the next episode of Covertape Chaos Zzapped in 2 weeks' time, and in the meantime, take care.